Hi, it's Alex again from beautiful Castle Rock State Park here in the Santa Cruz Mountains of California, part of the ancestral land of the Ohlone tribal groups of California Indians. First, I just want to say thanks for watching, and a special thank you to those of you who are joining us for our live Facebook watch party. If you have any questions or comments you want to share with us, I am actually not talking right now. I am also at a computer watching this video so that I can respond in the comments and moderate. So please do me a favor, keep it appropriate. Thanks. As you can see, we are unfortunately still closed. We are under a hard closure here at Castle Rock, which means trails, bathrooms, parking lots, the whole thing is still closed, unfortunately, until further notice, as part of the state's ongoing response to help keep the curve of COVID-19 flat. Unfortunately, that's true here at Castle Rock, as well as Portola Redwoods and Big Basin Redwoods state parks nearby. I know it's probably a little frustrating. I'm here at the park, you're not allowed at the park, and I do feel bad about that personally. Of course, that's what we have to do in this situation to fight the spread of coronavirus and novel COVID-19. But I'm hoping sharing the park a little bit with you today will help tide you over till we can open this place back up to the public. For more information and up-to-date information regarding closures and the state's efforts to react and be proactive about the coronavirus situation, you can definitely follow individual parks on our social media. We have Facebook and Instagram here, as well as our official parks website at www.parks.ca.gov/flatten the curve. All right, well, that's it for the fun stuff. Now let's get into the boring stuff? No, okay, wait. That was the Saxplorer. Thank you. And that was a little bit of a hint, not only about our theme for today, but for our destination. I thought we'd go on a little hike today and share with you a story about family, the early history of the park, and it's going to center around two brothers, Russell and Sigurd Varian. While I tell you this story, I thought we would go on a hike to the Varians brothers' favorite spot in the world, Castle Rock, the Castle Rock, after which our lovely park gets its name. Come on, let's go. Russell and Sigurd Varian were born around the turn of the 20th century to Irish immigrant parents, John and Agnes Varian. They moved out to the States and eventually to California. John was a mysticist and a poet, a singer, but supported the family working as a masseur. Agnes would eventually be the shopkeeper and postmistress at the Theosophist commune that they would move to in Halcyon, California. The Theosophists were sort of the alternative communal lifestyle, what one might call a hippie, back in the early part of the 20th century. And a lot of this connection between nature and spiritualism really resonated with Russell and Sigurd throughout their careers, and eventually in the forming of their own company as well. Russell was born in 1898. His brother Sigurd would follow a few years later. And the family would eventually move, while they were still very young, to Palo Alto, California. Now, Russell, the older brother, was at first thought by teachers and schoolmates to be slow. He would be, in fact, would be bullied a lot for this. Eventually, they found out that he was, in fact, dyslexic. Although he would struggle somewhat with his reading, writing, and language skills, even throughout his adulthood. He would show that he was definitely anything but slow, and in fact quite intellectual. Sigurd was perhaps not as intellectual, but just as brilliant, was a little more, in his youth, was the more outgoing of the two brothers. Now, their father John liked to take them hiking and camping, as he strongly valued nature and its opportunity for spirituality. He would take them on short hiking trips at first. As they got older, longer, and even overnight camping trips to, among other places, beautiful Castle Rock State Park. And throughout their life, they would return here, camping and hiking, and eventually Russell would even buy some property up here. But getting ahead of myself. Now, the brothers were lucky. They just missed being in World War I. They were set to deploy in a few months when the armistice was signed, and so they were spared the horrors of war. The two would sort of split ways for a bit after high school. Russell went and got his bachelor's and then his master's in physics at Stanford. Sigurd attended Cal Poly for a semester, but then he got bored and he dropped out. He was really into airplanes at this point, and after a brief stint working as an engineer at a power cable company, he went and started working as a barnstormer, literally a stunt pilot, flying around the country to do stunts in what they called flying circuses, not Monty Python. He was a pilot, but he was also an engineer at this point. He would work on the planes and repair them, and was very interested in improving the abilities of navigation and aeronautical navigation of the day. After doing this for a while, he was selected by Pan Am to be one of their pilots scouting out new routes, new airplane routes in Central America. While he's doing this, he noticed a few vulnerabilities, a few problems such as inaccuracies on a lot of the maps at the time, the inability for planes to really land, see where they're going at night or under cloud cover, and the vulnerability that he perceived of assets like specifically the Panama Canal, and how vulnerable it would be to enemy bombers, especially at night or under cloud cover. Now, at this time, World War II was starting to brew, and people became increasingly concerned with the rise of Adolf Hitler, including Sigurd Varian. Now, Russell, the physicist, had graduated, and after being rejected for his first application for PhD to the Stanford physics program, he started bouncing around different tech jobs, got himself a patent for technology using resonance to detect oil reserves underground, worked for Philo Farnsworth, inventor of the glass tubes for television that made it so popular. Eventually, his brother Sigurd would convince him of the need specifically for a radio-based radar that could detect aircraft in night or in the heavy cloud cover, regardless. The two brothers would begin work on this after Sigurd convinced Stanford to allow them not only to use some of their lab resources and even give them some startup money, but to allow them to consult with Professor Hansen, one of the leading physicists there at the time. Russell was the physicist, the theoretical scientist, the genius behind the theories that made these their inventions work. Sigurd was the engineer. Excellent. He built most of the prototypes from Russell's designs, and even led multiple scientific studies that would then confirm Russell's theories. And together, the Varians and Professor Hansen developed the klystron tube, which would make the microwaves, or as Russell described it, the bunching of electrons that were able to detect and penetrate cloud cover and detect enemy aircraft with accuracy. Now, this invention, the klystron tube, would become pivotal to Allied victory in World War II. At the beginning of the 1940s, the U.S. had not yet entered the war, but Britain had, and so there was rising tensions and conflict with Nazi Germany. The Germans couldn't beat the British Navy using conventional means. They didn't have the ships for it. The British Navy, very powerful. But the Germans had already been increasing their U-boat, their underwater boat or submarine navy. Their idea was to use these U-boats not as a direct attack on the British naval forces, but on shipping lines, to draw, using U-boats to draw off the escorts while others come in around behind and can attack the merchant ships with impunity. They called this the Wolfpack strategy. Now, with only a few hundred U-boats, they essentially would have been able to disrupt British shipping enough to effectively keep them out of the war. Britain being an island and needing to maintain connection for resources and logistical supplies with the Allies. The British at this point had already been working on radar technology, unbeknownst to the Varians. However, it was far too large. Their models were far too large to equip on aircraft. And so, even though at that point they could detect submarine boats, it was not practical for warfare. The Varians' klystron tube changed that, and they were able to use the radar to detect German submarines, largely thwarting the Nazis and keeping Britain in the war. For this critical invention, the Brothers Varian received awards and acclaim, degree of fame even, as heroes. Sigurd was actually named Alumnus of the Year at Cal Poly, where he had attended and dropped out after just a semester. Alumnus of the Year for a dropout. That's pretty impressive. And they would found their company, Varian Associates, in order to commercialize this klystron tube and the field of microwaves, as well as to continue developing defense weapons for the United States. In fact, one of these projects that they worked on was to develop a fuse for the atomic bomb. As early as 1958, the brothers had expressed regret in their participation in creating weapons of mass destruction, previously having considered their technologies to be in the spirit of defense rather than invasion. The impact of the Varian brothers' life, both on technology, industry, and conservation, would ripple on long after their death. Now, Russell was the first to pass in 1959, just 61 years old. He was actually in Alaska on a trip on behalf of the Sierra Club, scouting out new locations for potential parklands to be proposed in Alaska. They were hiking and boating to a lot of different remote locations, and during the trip, Russell had a massive heart attack and passed away. He and his wife did know about a congenital heart issue that had been uncovered about 10 years before that he had never really bothered him in his youth, but became more of an issue and a liability as he aged. Still, it is some comfort to know that he died doing what he loved, out in nature. In his own way, Sigurd went out doing what he loved as well. Just a couple years after his brother, he crashed in his private plane after losing his way in the darkness off the coast of Central America. He passed away, but luckily, the passenger in his plane survived and was able to swim to shore and be rescued. Now, just about 2 weeks before his fatal Alaska trip, Russell would obtain an option to purchase part of the land that would eventually become Castle Rock State Park. Now, he didn't have enough time to finish the purchase, of course, but his wife, his second wife, Dorothy Varian, did. She leveraged Semper Virens Fund into a land trust and used that to complete the purchase of the parcel and the property around it. As such, she was one of the driving forces behind Castle Rock eventually becoming a state park in 1968, just under a decade after Russell's death. Dorothy Varian's very cool and probably deserves her own such video. In addition to her efforts to create this park, she literally wrote the book on her husband and his brother. Russell's contributions to science would echo on as well. Besides the klystron, Russell also designed a number of technologies and really pioneered the field of nuclear magnetic resonance. There were a lot of practical applications to his work that still live on today, including some of the technology behind medical MRIs, imaging and scanning. Another was for measuring minute changes in the Earth's magnetic field using what they called the Earth's field magnetometer, a breakthrough in this technology. It existed before, but to do so, to measure the entire Earth's field, you needed the device to be in space. Theirs, you could have anywhere, and was even small and simple enough to be mobile. And this was the technology used for the observatory dedicated to Russell Varian in 1964, the Russell Varian Castle Rock Observatory, which is located in what is now Parklands. In 1981, the observatory would be moved to Fresno, California, but the land that it sat on would be added to the growing and now opened Castle Rock State Park. Now, as we reach the end of the story, we reach the end of our hike too, and we made it all the way to Castle Rock. I think the Varian brothers would have been proud. They used to think of these caves up here as their own, but I think that they would be cool with us visiting. And here we are, Castle Rock. The rock and the park itself stand as a sort of legacy to the Varians. If you ever wondered how much of an impact one passionate, dedicated family can have on the country, on current events, and on the landscape itself, look no further than Castle Rock State Park. Thanks everybody for joining me. See you next week. Do you know the wilderness world? Many have been in the wilderness, but never touched it, for it is a world within him who looks. To touch it, one must have more than 5 senses awake and active. It is like the inner world of the pagans. It is there but unrevealed, save to him who can see. To enter the wilderness world, one must go unencumbered by values of the world from which he had fled, and find anew the values that are ages old. No longer the tyrant who bends nature to his small ends, he is humbled to the station of a simple child in nature's vastness. If he would climb a mountain, he must toil and sweat his way to the top. When night descends, he builds his fire and sits beside that focal point of life, and talks or sings with those who share his world. Russell Varian.